Are we good, Dr. Yannicka? Do you want to start or do you want me to?
You go right ahead, Karen.
Okay, thank you. Good morning, everybody. So the first agenda item that we have is the 2022 refinancing plan, which will be presented. I'm sure you guys are all familiar with Jamie and Carly from PFM. They reached out to me. They're always looking at opportunities for us to save money with refinancing opportunities. They brought this to me on some callable bonds that are coming up for 2022. So I'm going to actually turn this over to Jamie.
Thank you so much, and good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here with you this morning. I'm going to go ahead and screen share. And we always like to start off talking a little bit about market conditions and the interest rate environment. So on page 1 of our handout, you'll see 3 snapshots of the same index. This is the Municipal Marketplace Data Curve, or MMD for short. And we're currently at the blue line, which tells us 2 things. Not only are we at nearly all-time low interest rates, the yield curve is very, very flat, meaning the rate's not all that much different in year 1 as it is in year 30. So both of those conditions are excellent when you are considering refinancing opportunities, such as the ones we're going to discuss today. If you look at the middle snapshot, again, same index, it just goes all the way back to 1993, so you can get a more historic perspective. And we drew a red box on the far right-hand side, so you can see, what has happened most recently. This big spike upward, of course, is the stay-at-home order from COVID. The market obviously had a very negative reaction, and then, shortly thereafter, set the all-time lows in August of 2020. The bottom chart is just a blow up of that red box up above, so you can get a better look at what has happened over the course of 2020 and 2021. So again, there's the stay-at-home order, the big spike upward. Here's the all-time lows in August of 2020. And if you look to the far right-hand side, you can see we're not very far off those all-time lows. So again, an excellent interest rate environment. The next page is your existing debt portfolio, which, as Kara mentioned, we monitor at all times for refinancing opportunities such as the ones we're going to discuss today. As always, the top half of this page is gross debt service, meaning principal and interest on each of your various issues that are listed in columns 2 through 14. The bottom half of the page is your local effort, meaning principal plus interest minus the state reimbursement that you received to varying degrees on your issues. And you can see that state reimbursement near the bottom. There's a line labeled PE percentage. That stands for percent of the project eligible for reimbursement. And as you look across that line, you can see that that varies anywhere from 7.81% on the low end to about 26.24% on the high end. For today's discussion, we're really focused on your 2016 A bonds, which are callable. Again, that's another line near the bottom, the call date. The 2016 A's are callable May 15 of 2022. And then likewise, your 2017 bonds in column 25, those are callable on November 15 of 2022. So this is a comprehensive 2-step plan of finance that will cover all of calendar year 2022. That's how the IRS looks at things in terms of calendar years, not in terms of your fiscal year. If we go to the next page, there's some information on the 2 series we're focused on. So step 1 would involve refinancing the Series A of 2016. The 2016 A's currently are outstanding in the amount of $9,840,000. Again, that call date is in mid-May, and the average rate right now on the 2016 A's is about 3%, which is pretty low, but we can improve upon that further and wring out some savings for the district. That issue has a final maturity of November 15 of 2037, and as always, we're not proposing to extend the debt at all. We're simply proposing to replace the old higher rates with today's lower rates, much like you would refinance your home mortgage. Then we'd come back later in 2022 and refund the 2017 bonds. They coincidentally are outstanding in a similar amount as the 2016 A's. They're callable in November 15th of 22. They have an even lower average rate, a 2.4%. So naturally, we're starting from a lower rate. Step 2 is going to have less savings than step 1, all else being equal. And they have a final maturity of 2039. Again, we're not going to extend the debt at all, just replace the old higher rates. The reason we're breaking this into a 2-step plan is current IRS tax law allows tax exempt refundings at a bank qualified interest rate if you're issuing 10 million or less per calendar year. But of course, there's exceptions to every rule. And on a current period refunding, like both of these are, as long as we meet all the tests and the rules, only a small portion of each refunding will actually count against your $10 million BQ limits. And we'll look at that estimate in just a minute. We're also proposing a maximum parameters resolution for each refunding. And that's no different than what you've done in the past. What that gets you is flexibility. So we'll look at the timeline shortly as well, but once the board approves a maximum parameters resolution, that's the only action needed, and that gives us the flexibility to enter the market and hold the competitive internet auction on the best day, as opposed to being wed to a day when the board meets that evening, which might be a voting meeting, might be once or twice or 3 times a month, and those might not be the best days in the market. So in a maximum parameters resolution, we'll set forth a maximum principal amount, and it will be a larger amount than we actually need, because we need the flexibility once we get the winning bid to resize, to structure the savings appropriately. And so, some maturities will need to be increased, some will need to be decreased. So in order to do that sizing per state law, we have to set a maximum principal amount in each and every maturity. So the total will be roughly 20% greater than what we're actually going to issue at the end of the day. We'll have a maximum interest rate. Again, that will be greater than what we anticipate getting, because the interest rate likewise has to accommodate any kind of bid. And we could see a par bid, we could see a premium bid, we could see a discount bid. So the maximum interest rate will likely be in the 5% range, again, just to accommodate any type of bid that we get. And then the maximum final maturity, that's easy because it's going to be what the maturity date already is. That's not going to change at all. And then the final piece is a minimum net savings target. And we'll look at those in just a minute, what we're suggesting that you might set those minimum net savings targets at. And really that parameter is the most important parameter, a minimum net savings target, because if we get below that level, we're just going to hit pause and we're going to wait until we can hit that level. And as always, it's a minimum, not a maximum. It's my job to save you every dollar that we can, but we have to know, at what point is the savings meaningful, or should we just hit pause and wait? And then you don't need to hold any special meetings to approve the final pricing. We'll be in constant communication with your administration. And that process is what you've historically been using, so that's nothing new. Okay, so on to the important page. Page 4. So in step 1, the refunding of the 2016 A bonds, you can see the size of that issue will be just under that $10 million BQ threshold that I mentioned. There's the bank qualified. There's a yes in that box. We're going to meet all the tests. So only about 373,000 of that 10 million will actually count against your BQ limits for 2022. And our conservative estimate of net local effort savings to the district right now is almost $413,000, or 4.29%. Oops. Going too far here. If you look down below in column 13, the way I have structured this 413,000 in net savings, if you start at the top of column 13 and work, or I'm sorry, column 14 and work your way down, it's about 78,000 and change in the current fiscal year, meaning that money is sitting in your general fund right now. And when your bill comes in the spring, it would be for 78,000 and change less than it otherwise would be, less than what you budgeted. And then I took the remainder of the savings and I spread them out over the remaining life of the issue to help give you some future benefit as well. And again, at the bottom of column 14, you can see that totals the almost $413,000. Then we'd come back in step 2. It's fighting with me this morning. And you can see that series would just be under $10 million as well. You get the bank qualified interest rates. It would use about 348,000 and change of your BQ limits for 22. So again, the beauty of separating this into 2 steps is you ultimately get bank qualified, the lowest possible interest rate on almost $20 million of refundings in total. But as long as we meet the tests, which we will, only 722,000 actually counts against your BQ limits or is used up. So if you had leases that you want to do on a tax exempt basis, or if something else popped up over the course of calendar year 2022, you still have a lot of flexibility or room within your $10 million calendar year limits for other things should they arise. So remember I said we're starting at a lower interest rate on the 2017s to begin with. So net savings to the district on this step is about 348,000. And down below in column, I did it again, in column 16, you can see the way we've structured those savings is roughly 84,000 in your upcoming budget year ending 2023. And then the balance over the remaining life of the issue, again, totaling about 348,000 at the bottom of that column. I'm going to pause there for a moment and see if you have any questions on that page before I go on. I know that's a lot of information. Okay, hearing none, I'm going to go to the next page. There's 2 sample motions for your consideration if or when you'd like to proceed with the 2-step plan. There's 1 motion for each step. The first one authorizes the finance team, which consists of myself as your independent financial advisor, Fox Rothschild as your bond counsel, and of course your local solicitor would be involved to proceed and get the paperwork in order for a competitive internet auction to refinance the Series A of 2016. And I'm suggesting a minimum net savings target of $200,000, which is rounding up slightly, roughly the 2% historic benchmark. It's not a rule, it's not a law, it's just a benchmark. But these refundings are both healthy enough to have a minimum in that range. So that's what we are suggesting as the minimum target. And then down below, you can see there's a second motion that would authorize the second step or the refunding of the 2017s, again, to get the paperwork in order. And we're suggesting a minimum net savings target of $200,000 on that one as well. At the bottom of that page, you can see a sample timeline. If you're inclined to move this to your board agenda for October 19th, you'll notice all these dates say or later after them. We always put together a timeline that is basically the fastest that you could move. But if you wanted a presentation to the full board at your October 19th meeting, we could make that happen. And then if the board were so inclined to pass the 2 motions above at that October 19th meeting, we could be back with said paperwork in order and the maximum parameters resolutions at your November voting meeting. And then that would allow us to get everything in order so that you can be one of the first issues out of the gate, if you will, early in January. And we've done that a lot of times at Springfield Township School District, and it's worked really well. Historically, there's pent up investor demand because not a whole lot happens the last 2 weeks of December in the market. So, it's really proven advantageous in the past to be, one of the first horses out of the gate, if you will. And that's really one of the important dates, because that's the pricing, that's the competitive internet auction. That's when you actually lock in the new interest rates and lock in the savings. So that could happen around January 4th, which would allow for settlement of step 1 around Valentine's Day. And then we'd be back in mid-July with the auction for step 2 and locking in interest rates and savings. And then that series can settle around mid-August, because you're allowed to have up to 90-day escrows on a current period refunding. So those settlement dates are roughly, 90 days or so before the call dates that we looked at the beginning. Just to walk through the mechanics very quickly, because that's a good summary. Those are the 2 most important pages, 4 and 5. The rest of the pages are just the backup. So on page 7, you can see your 2016A bonds. If you did nothing, you'd continue to make the payments on this page. And you can see in column 3, your coupons currently range from a 2.25% on the short end to a 3.4% on the long end. And again, you can see that final payment date that I referenced earlier. Page 8 is the portion of the 2016 bonds that we would refund. We won't quite refund all of them, most likely. And the reason is we need to keep the size of the refunding issue under that $10 million limit. So we would refund the longest end of the 2016A bonds where the highest coupons are in column 3. And then on page 9, this is bonds remaining after refunding. This is the estimated remaining portion that we would not refund, and you'd continue to make these last couple of payments on page 9. Page 10 just shows how much money we need to pay the refunded portion of the 2016As off at their call date on May 15th, principal and interest. And then the next page is just the backup page for the savings. And you can see the conservative interest rates we're assuming for this analysis in column 4 ranges from a 1.3% on the short end to a 2.3% on the long end, and you still pay off in November 2037. What we're illustrating is a conservative estimate of the net savings to the district. So you can see in this bottom box, the state's share. Unfortunately, the state gets the same share of the savings as they pay on the 2016A bonds. So that's already netted out. So when I say net savings, I mean what is left in your pocket at the end of the day. And then we go through the same mechanics for the 2017s. There you see all of your 2017 bonds in column 3. If you did nothing, you'll keep paying 1.75% on the short end to 3% on the long end. Final payment November of 2039. Page 14 is the portion we'd refund. Again, it would be the long end of the 2017s where the interest rates are the highest. Page 15 is the small portion that is likely to remain outstanding, so you keep making the payments on this page. Here you can see the call date, November 15th, the principal and interest we would need to pay off the refunded portion of the 2017s. And finally, the backup page for the savings. And you can see on this issue, we're conservatively assuming a 1.2% on the short end to a 2.26% on the long end. That's what generates the savings that we looked at on the summary. And likewise, the state share is already netted out of there. So I will pause there, and I know that was a ton of information. This is very similar to refinancings that the board has entertained in the past, and I'm happy to answer any questions that you have at this time.
Ms. Doyle, I'll go first. How are you?
I'm doing well. How are you?
Good, good. Excellent presentation. That was a ton of detail, so please excuse if I fumble over my questions here.
Not at all.
This makes a lot of sense. It is consistent with what we've considered in the past. I just want to be clear in a couple things, and let me shoot out the questions and then we can walk through them. The first is just, I want to be really clear on what the in-year financial costs are relative to the in-year savings. So I know the total savings is over the length of the bond itself, right? The loan itself. So I want to look at the in-year impact just so we have extreme clarity on that, inclusive of fees to execute. Then, because it does look like a magical situation to take advantage of the interest rates as they stand today, why only 2? If we still have additional room, are these the only 2 tranches of bonds that would make sense given the rates that are on them today? So just a little bit of clarity there. And then the last one would just be, is there any advantage to moving faster and locking this in December relative to January? I just didn't know if there was a specific reason this needed to happen in 2022.
Sure, all great questions. So to your first question, estimated cost of issuance are already netted out of the numbers that we just looked at. And we budget in part based on what you've historically paid. We will, of course, bid out everything that we possibly can. And that's why you use the competitive internet auction process. But for budgeting purposes, we've budgeted about $180,000 worth of costs that are already netted out of here that would get paid out of bond proceeds at settlement. So, you know, again, when I say net savings to the school district, that's after budgeted cost of issuance, which we hope to improve on through the bidding process, and after the state share.
Got it. So just for clarity, there's no, like, Ms. Green doesn't have to write a check for 180,000.
No.
It's
Nope.
credited from the
Correct.
payoff of the bond at the time of closing.
Exactly. Exactly.
That's helpful. Thank you.
Your second question about other refunding opportunities, I go back to page 2 and the call date line near the bottom of the page. You know, you can see the call date on each of these issues, and most of these issues we've already refunded the bulk of them, and you can see on the purpose line, you know, what we refunded and when. And so at this point in time, these are the two most viable candidates. You can see, you know, your 2018 bonds aren't callable till 2025. Your 2019 bonds aren't callable till 2024. You know, you have a different call date on every series. And if it made any economic sense, you know, certainly I would be back in touch with you. But at the moment, these are the two viable opportunities that you have for the calendar year.
That's helpful. Thank you.
One thing that could make other opportunities become viable sooner than the year in which you see the call date is, you know, there's some pending legislation, and it's been pending in one form or another ever since, you know, the beginning of 2018, when federal tax law change took effect January 1 and eliminated municipal government's ability to do tax exempt advance refundings. So, you know, that's been pending in various pieces of legislation for the last several years to reinstate tax exempt advance refundings, meaning you can still get the tax exempt BQ rates, but you can do it in advance of that call date. If that passed and something changed, I monitor this all the time. I would certainly be in touch with your administration if a tax law change had an effect on our advice.
Great. Thank you.
And then timing. So because of those call dates, this really is the fastest you can move. I'm looking at the timeline on page 5 again. So, you know, this is the fastest you can move because, you know, you can't settle before these dates, and you can't have the sale. You know, the sale is usually, you know, 30 to 35 days or so before the settlement date. So this is literally the fastest that you can proceed on a tax exempt bank qualified basis, which is key to the plan. And, you know, if the crux of that question is interest rate risk, you know, interest rates wiggle around every single day. And if you go back to my chart, the bottom, you know, you can see interest rates have been trending upward a little bit. I mean, they're still terrific in the grand picture of things. You know, it's certainly not a, you know, a runaway interest rate environment, but they have been trending upward a little bit. And that's why we're always conservative in the estimates that we share with you. But there's still a ton of economic recovery that needs to happen. So all the kind of negative things that you hear about in the news, you know, probably the top 3 right now, not that there's only 3 by any means, but you know, the COVID-19 variant's a big problem, inflation's a big problem, unemployment's a big problem, you know, supply chain, cost of materials. I mean, the list goes on and on. All those kind of negative things actually help the interest rate that you can lock in, because it causes the investors who are out there buying bonds like yours, it causes a flight to quality, meaning they get nervous and they feel better, you know, parking their money somewhere nice and safe. It doesn't get much nicer and safer than a Pennsylvania school district bond with an excellent credit rating like yours, you know, as opposed to putting their money, investing their money in more risky types of investments. So, you know, the negative things you hear in the news actually create more investor demand. And in general, you know, for quite some time now, there's been more investor demand than there is supply of this type of bond. So that's also helping to keep interest rates low. You know, the other thing you probably hear a lot about in the news is the Federal Reserve Committee. And they're talking about quantitative easing or easing up on the asset purchases that they do, that they conduct each month. And, that's part of why you're seeing this chart go up a little bit, since the last Federal Reserve Committee meeting, that, they're also talking about when is the appropriate time to start increasing short-term overnight rates that the Federal Reserve controls. And, that may be coming in 2022 and 2023 for sure. But, again, there's a lot of economic recovery that needs to occur, and there's a lot more investor demand than there is supply right now. So, that's very much working in your favor.
That was a helpful explanation. And one follow-up then, if interest rates were to be more volatile, go up higher than where you have projected these savings, that's why we're setting a minimum savings amount that you would then pull this
Exactly.
this action if we weren't going to get at least 200,000 in benefit.
Exactly.
Okay.
Okay, are there any more questions?
I think I have it might be a silly question, and this is with regard to the minimum savings. Like, at what point does something like this not make sense when it comes to money that the school district is saving? Like, when we look at a minimum savings of 200,000 versus the actual hope, it seems like a huge difference. But where, and I know you were talking about the 200,000 based on the percentage, but for the taxpayers, for our actual constituents, and understanding why this doesn't make sense anymore at a certain point, why is that? And I apologize if there's not a clear question in there. I'm just trying to.
There absolutely is. That's a great question. I get that question a lot because, the other extreme of that question is I occasionally have clients say, well, why wouldn't I do this even if I only save $1? And, my response is this is a lot of work for your business office and, everyone involved in the transaction. You wouldn't do this for $1. But certainly as issues get shorter and shorter and you've squeezed savings out because you refund an issue several times over its life. Certainly there are issues that do not meet that historic benchmark. And I have clients where, they might only have 7 or 10 years left on the life of an issue. And they'll say, well, I'll set my minimum net savings target at $50,000. That's still a meaningful number to me. I know it's never going to be, a huge savings generator. It's what number is meaningful to you, because at some point something is better than nothing. Now these refundings are healthy enough that I'm very comfortable with the 200,000. Like I said, I actually rounded the benchmark up a little bit, because these savings are almost 413,000 and 348,000. So, I don't think you're going to have trouble hitting the $200,000 mark, which again is why I'm suggesting it. But it's what is significant to you. And while these savings are, ideally you'd use them for capital improvements or some one-time type of expenditure and not to balance your regular operating budget, they're helpful in dealing with all the regular and irregular these days challenges that you face in your budget.
Okay, thank you for that.
Also, just to piggyback, at my tenure during Cheltenham, I didn't work with Jamie, I worked with Brad Reming, but we used PFM. There was a time that we did go out for issuance. We did the same parameters, the bond resolution, everything. And the market just didn't come in where it was expected. They ended up giving me a call, talking it over and saying, we don't think we're going to hit target on what we talked about. How do you want to move forward? And we pulled back from it. And then, they paid attention to the market. And when it was a better time to possibly go out, we actually went back out and achieved even higher savings than we had anticipated. So Those minimums are in there for a reason, but there's also communication and everything else that happens. That's why there's baselines and benchmarks, so that there's a comfort level with the board so that they can kind of work their magic behind the scenes and all the work that goes in it. But if for any reason it's just not getting us where we feel comfortable, that's a conversation Jamie definitely will have, at our level, and then we would bring it back if we needed to. So there's some safety nets in there.
That's great background information. Thank you for that. So you're fully on board with this. This makes perfect sense to you, to the administration.
Absolutely.
Perfect.
I love when Jamie calls me. That means we're saving money.
That's good to hear.
So we would be looking for adding, Jamie would give a presentation as she normally does at the upcoming board meeting. And then we would be looking for the motions to be approved for authorization to proceed at our next, that would be the October 19th meeting, if you are all okay with that.
Sounds good to me.
Yeah, good to me as well.
Yes.
All right. Thank you. Any more questions for Jamie?
That was a great presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Well, thank you to Jamie and Carly. Thank you very much.
Have a great day.
Thanks, you
Thanks,
too.
you guys.
Okay, our next agenda item is an ESSER funding overview. I just want to make sure that everybody got the attachments and everything that I sent, or they're able to access it on board docs. This Excel sheet is pretty big, so I think it's going to come up very small if I screen share everything. So I don't want to do that to everybody's eyes, if that's okay, if we can follow along. I'll just hit on some highlights. Dr. Yannicone touched base on this at a board meeting during one of her superintendent reports through a slideshow, where she did discuss just the different pots of ESSER money. It's hard to believe that we started talking about COVID in 2020, and now we're moving through ESSER 1, ESSER 2, and now the ARP ESSER money. So we wanted to kind of put it out there just to show some accountability on how we are using the federal funds and what they're being used for. So the spreadsheet that was compiled started with the great work of Katie, because she provides us with updates and tracking of the grant. She does a great job with that. So I kind of piggybacked on her work to provide a little bit more of a breakdown to Dr. Yannicone's presentation that she did at the board meeting, to give you an idea of what actually those big pockets were at a smaller level. So just starting with the ESSER Community Cares money, that was pass-through money through the county. At the time, the Community Cares money and the PCCD ESSER money and the ESSER 1 money, that came out when ESSER or COVID first started. So really what that focus was really to focus on cleanliness and sanitation of the buildings, getting buildings prepared, making sure that there was PPE for staff. And then as we progressed through COVID and things were shut down, it was really ramping up so that districts could offer students virtual platforms for learning. So the bulk of the money and the focus of the money for the ESSER Community Cares, the PCCD and ESSER 1 was really on cleaning buildings, giving staff and students PPE such as face masks, face shields. There's hand sanitation, stations, wipes, anything you can think of. There were sprayers that were bought to clean surfaces, additional cleaning products. There was also additional staff brought on under our current custodial contract to offer some more support for cleaning. There was also additional support in other areas once school peeled back in to assist with aids and instruction, and making sure that we had that distancing and following the health and safety plan. So those 3 pockets of money, or 4 pockets of money, was really focused on implementing the health and safety plan, focusing on the health and safety plan, and starting to get students back into the in-person instructional setting. So if you have any questions on those areas, I know one that'll stick out that we finally got board approved just recently was the bipolarization units. So that was part of the PCCD ESSER money, and that's just a different agency of how the money came through. It's all federally funded. It's just what entity it came to the district through. So then we moved on to ESSER 2, and I'll go back over this if anybody has any specifics. We're in the midst of spending ESSER 2 right now, and ESSER 2 is geared more towards getting students back into schools and getting away from the virtual learning and making sure that we're addressing any learning loss or anything that impacted students during the COVID shutdown or during the transition of the virtual learning. So things that we did with that was the Spartan Academy, as Dr. Yannicone touched upon in her presentation, additional PPE supplies, and a big chunk was supporting our community and our students during the virtual learning piece and continuing on because we are offering free lunch to all students so that we are addressing any food insecurities and making sure that students are fed breakfast and lunch during this time. So a big chunk of those funds went to support being able to offer that program, and we're still offering that until the end of the year. So that's ESSER 2. And then things that we are looking to continue with ESSER 2 is just continued instructional support, technology support. There are several items that the money can be earmarked for, but mainly addressing learning loss and mainly addressing to get our students where they need to be and giving that support to the students through materials, through programming. And then the big chunk of money is the ARP ESSER funds, which we have until the end of November to submit the plan for. We're currently getting, Dr. Yannicone through meetings is getting feedback from different stakeholders, key stakeholders in our community to make sure that we're getting input on how they would like to see funds spent or what areas. But really, and with this one, we have to spend 20% on learning loss, and it has to be evidence-based. So we're game planning on the administrative level on how that is going to happen and what that will look like. And then the other 80% of it can be used to, again, support that learning loss piece. So it's through technology. If you recall, we just ramped up leases for student devices. We ramped up some server upgrades in order to support that. We ramped up another lease for teacher devices. So all of those things are eligible under the ESSER guidelines. So we're working collaboratively to make sure that we are maximizing the use of these funds. Also from my lens, I'm ensuring that it's like a 3-year cliff is what they call it, a spending cliff, because what we want to make sure is that anything that we're peeling in that has to be sustained, we are making sure that we're able to do that and support that after this money goes away. So we are being very conscious about that. We're being very intentional about spend on these funds to ensure that we don't leave big gaps or big holes in our budget once these funds are expired. Are there any questions?
Kara, if I could just
Sure.
mention to the board members, Kara mentioned that I'm in the midst of gathering input. One of the requirements different with ARP ESSER 3 from the previous grants is that we must include community input, and we have to be able to document that we've done so. So the components of that community input to date, I sent out a grant funding survey to the community. That's been resent several times by the building principals and by the home and school associations. And right now I have about 150, I just pulled up the responses, about 150 responses from parents in the community that include an opportunity for them to answer multiple choice questions and also be able to provide some narrative input. Overwhelmingly, that continues the top request of the community to date is for mental health resources. And so we'll be keeping that in mind as we plan the use of the funds. There's also, coming in close second and thirds is additional staffing for math and reading support to make sure that students are caught up in their core skills. In addition to that, so far I've just attended the initial meeting of the Elementary Home and School Association and taken some input there. Next week, I'll be at the secondary meeting, and tonight I'll be at the Multicultural Parents Association. So I'll be gathering some data from those groups as well. And then I'm attending each of the building level faculty meetings this month or early in November in order to be able to get input from the staff as well. And so that'll be the whole of the community input before we get together to finalize the grant application. The application's due November 29th. And while we can make adjustments to it over the next few years, we'll be using this information as a focus. So I want to make sure you knew that there were, ample opportunities for community input.
Thank you for that.
Any questions on this?
I have a question. Everything you went through, Ms. Green, is like necessary, good, important spending. And of course, each round of this government funding had these parameters that we had to meet. So I think we can all intuitively say, yes, good, like these were good spend. Do we have any mechanism in place to say, like, we in the school district of Springfield Township use these funds more effectively than we would have hoped, or as effectively as possible, or benchmarks against other school districts, maybe even discussions, Dr. Anicone, that you have with other superintendents to know, like, how can we look the community straight in the face and say, we use these funds to their maximum potential, right? Is there a way to measure that?
Yeah, I'll first say yes. At our county meetings, which are still weekly on Thursdays, we do share ideas about how we're utilizing our federal resources. Obviously, the challenges are a little different for places like Jenkintown and us and Lower Moreland than they are for places like North Penn or, a Central Bucks, those kinds of places that are much larger. I think for me, the goal will be that by the end of 2024, that the vast majority of our students are on track, are on grade level, and are doing well emotionally and socially and behaviorally in school. I think if we can see those positives, we'll know. And quite frankly, with the PPE, the low numbers of illness that we had in the schools and the almost non-existent in-school transmission, to me would be the evidence you'd need that the mitigation measures were working. So throughout the pandemic, Springfield Township has had one of the highest vaccination rates and the lowest transmission rates as a community and within the schools. So as an example, right now we have, it's fewer than 10 children in quarantine, whereas in other districts there are hundreds of children in quarantine. And that's relative to size, I understand, but I think those are some of the measures. Immediate measures would be that rate of illness and attendance rate, et cetera. I think I shared with you all early in the school year that our attendance rate last year was actually better than it had been the 2 years prior. So I think that those are some of the immediate measures I would use, but long-term measures for us, we shared it, I think Dr. Johnston shared with you all that we are behind in our grade level standards in reading and math based on the STAR reading and STAR math scores. So that's our goal, that in the next 2 years, we're gonna overcome that gap and learning loss, and we're going to move forward back on track. Because we are seeing some of the effects of children not being in school, some children not in school for 18 months. We are seeing some of those effects in behaviors and in ability to attend to tasks at school and in academic performance. So our goal right now is to work through all of that and get them back on track, if possible by the end of 22, but ultimately by the end of the life of the grant.
And Dr. Anicone, that was an excellent answer. Two follow-ups then. One is, like, do we have potentially on the website where we have all of our COVID data, anything that would state like how we're faring relative to others, or, you know, even an assessment scorecard, anything that would say we feel confident in our approach? Is there anything like that?
No, there isn't. I mean, we certainly could do that. I'm unaware of anyone posting anything like that. Some districts do have their history of illness and quarantine on their website going all the way back to the first days of the pandemic. You know, we chose not to do that. We were trying to stay focused on the educational program. But we could certainly put something on there. For example, we could take this ESSER presentation that I shared earlier this year, and we could highlight the net effect we believe of that. But it would all be, it would be supposition. There's not a direct line.
But you did cover a lot of that materially in the ESSER presentation, which was given to the public as well.
Yeah, the ESSER presentation is on the website. Okay. The academic achievement presentation is on the website. And our goals are on the website. And all of those have also been included in the newsletters that I'm sending out seasonally. So the next newsletter is coming out in mid-November. Now I could include, if you like, a summary of that information in that November newsletter, sort of a status update on how the ESSER dollars or the impact they may or may not be having.
Up to you. I think it could be valuable. I mean, it's a big chunk of dollars that you've never had to figure out how to spend before, right? So sure. It's reassuring to taxpayers that we're using these, you know, federally provided funds very smartly, so it's not going to impact our ongoing operations.
Sure, absolutely. And some of it, I mean, I'd be happy to do that. I can share some of that information and tie it together. Attendance rates, even access. One of the things that Kara didn't mention that we've used it, I don't think was mentioned, was the hotspots for children in areas where internet wasn't accessible. You know, you heard these stories all over the country of kids sitting in Wawa parking lots and, you know, things like that. And so we were able to maintain for students whose families struggle economically, we were able to maintain their attendance and their ongoing achievement. So I think those are accomplishments that we could celebrate with the community. I'm less comfortable comparing to other districts. We don't really have a measure. And I think we're all of us as superintendents are really trying to keep focus on the fact that we're in this together and we're going to help each other through the pandemic, and we're going to make sure all our kids are okay. So I'm less interested in sort of a benchmark relative to our neighbors than I am sharing this, you know, the successes and where we still have challenge and are working in the district.
Maybe we could just say we're better than private schools.
I certainly think that, or I wouldn't be here.
All right, thanks for that.
Okay.
Any other questions? Okay, we're going to move on to the, believe it or not, 22-23 budget discussion. I know everybody goes nuts because they're like, it's October, what is going on? So I did send, and I can screen share this, but I'm not great at screen sharing. So let me see. Is anything coming up on this?
Not yet, Kara. What are you trying to share?
The timeline.
Oh, hang on.
I have two screens through a doc, so it comes up funny.
Mm-hmm. There it is. Okay.
Thank you.
Everybody can see that okay?
Yes.
Increase the size.
And this was also sent to everybody, and it's also attached on board docs under administrative content. So this is the timeline that I compiled, reviewed with Dr. Yannicone. It incorporates deadlines for our district in conjunction with deadlines that are required by PDE. So the big thing is that PDE notified all districts of our index this year is 3.4%. So that is the amount that we can raise taxes without asking for exceptions or doing a voter referendum. And this year, the recommendation that I'm bringing forth along with Dr. Yannicone is that instead of going through a preliminary budget process, which I know that that's historically what has been done at the district, the preliminary budget process allows you to, the ultimate goal of a preliminary budget allows you to apply for exceptions. With PDE, basically you're submitting to PDE a budget that shows that you're going to need a tax increase higher than the 3.4%. And that gives you the ability to apply for exceptions. And if you need to raise above the 3.4%, whatever you're approved by PDE for the exceptions, you can raise even higher. Right now, from my understanding, the special education exception is the only exception that districts are getting right now. The other two have kind of phased out. That was the PSERS and the debt service. So special education right now is the one that people are getting the additional increases or allowability to raise taxes. Obviously, the other way that we could do this is to put a question for voter referendum, which I don't think anybody wants to go down that path, to have the community answer the question whether or not they want to go above 3.4%. Historically, I think it's been done twice in Pennsylvania. Upper Dublin was one of those districts when they went for their new high school. So the other option that you can do with PDE, with the PDE budget process, is doing something called an opt-out resolution. And what the opt-out resolution basically states is the board passes a resolution, and they basically state in that resolution that they are not going to raise taxes above the 3.4%, which is the Act 1 index. So you bypass the preliminary budget process and applying for exceptions. And you're basically working to build your budget that would go no higher than a 3.4% tax increase. I'm recommending this for a couple reasons. One, and I'll give some historical data. In reviewing the last 10 years at Springfield, 9 out of the 10 years, the tax increase has been below the index. I believe in 13, 14 might have been a year that it slightly went higher, but all the other years it's been at or below index as far as our tax increases. I know that is something that we discuss as we get into the budget process of trying to stay under the index, but making sure that we are building our millage in. So this option doesn't take away from that. Basically what it's saying is that we are saying from the front of the budget process that we are not going to go above index. The second thing is it also gives us time as an administrative group to really be intentional about budget and to take a look at budgets, get a lot of input from what I call the budget administrators. Those are all the directors. Those are all the building principals. It gives a lot of collaboration on building the budget. We are doing what's called a zero-based budget this year. We are going to build from zero, and then we're going to work that way to ensure that we are aligning our financial resources for the academic needs, opportunities, programs that best meet our district goals and for what we need for our students. So, and with this, we would look at presenting what I would call a first look budget instead of a preliminary budget around March to the finance committee. So then we can start those discussions. Again, it will give us the time that administration needs to really put thoughtfulness into it, get input, and making sure we're aligning everything with where we're at. Another goal of mine, I talked to Dr. Yannicone with this, is to get as close to balancing the budget without having to use fund balance at all, or very minimally. So that is my ultimate goal of presenting a budget to the finance committee and ultimately to the board. So that'll give us time to do that and to really be intentional about where funds are and how funds are budgeted in our 22-23 budget. So if the Finance Committee is okay with that recommendation, we would look to doing the resolution at the October meeting. Ultimately, the deadline is January, I believe it's January 18th, you'll see there. That is where the deadline for PDE is for the opt-out resolution with that. The other statistic that I wanted to give is just benchmarking against other Montgomery County districts. Last year, 14 Monco districts did the opt-out. And in polling all of the business managers, those 14 are looking that they're 90% confident that they'll be opting out again this year. So it's nothing new to school districts or nothing. It's not a new look. I know it would be new, a little bit different for Springfield in the process, but the output will still be the same. It's not taking away from anything. It's not circumventing anything. There's two options that you can go in doing a budget for PDE and what they require. And so this is just an alternative option that we would be recommending. So if you have any questions.
So Ms. Green, I guess what this would mean is that we won't have that really scary number that we normally see. I feel like that preliminary budget that we often see is this ridiculously high number that, and then we see it get whittled down, not even a little bit. It's usually like chopped in half or more. Is that, so we would skip that, but you'd still have a preliminary that would be more in line with the final numbers?
Correct. That would be the goal. And again, there's the hard part with the Act 1 legislation that was passed and the whole budget process is the budget process starts so early. I mean, we're just starting this fiscal year. We're really getting into the meat of school and the academic year and spending that we're now trying to guesstimate things that are going to happen starting July 1. There's things that aren't out yet that are very crucial to building the budgets. We don't have even first look rates yet on our healthcare, let alone second rates. Second rates are usually what you stand by March, and having those numbers in, we'll have those numbers. The other big one is PSERS does not get certified until December. So that rate could really swing a budget either way. We're hoping it doesn't. Projections are saying it's not supposed to shake us up too much, but we'll have those numbers certified and ready to go instead of having to guesstimate or, you know, to build a higher number in so that worst case scenario doesn't happen. We'll have more real numbers. It also gives the administrative team, again, to build those real numbers and to be thoughtful on how they're building their budgets and aligning it to the district goals and to their departmental and building goals.
Thank you.
If we didn't choose the opt-out, when would we see preliminary budget?
It would, I believe we talked about January. Preliminary budget would have to be approved in February. So I would still want to have some time to pull things together. And then again, we'd put a preliminary budget together, which would have some estimates, as Mr. DeFranco indicated, that there would be most likely some guesstimates as opposed to a little bit closer to what that final number would be. But that would be around January. We would have a finance committee meeting and then with the intent to adopt in February. And we're still meeting deadlines. And then the next big action that would need to happen is the proposed final. We obviously would check in before May. We're not just going to be silent on the budget from February until that time and say, here's the proposed final. But we would check in between that time, but that would give us some time to make sure that we shore up numbers. But that would be the next big board action, would be in May for the proposed final. And then obviously in June would be the final budget. And again, I think I relayed this last year as I was wrapping up this year's budget, that I really don't like a lot of change between the proposed final and the final. You should really have a sense by May without a big swing in some, you know, unless something like COVID happens, in that time period, that would really shake up the budget world. So.
Jeff, I think one of the things Kara and I talked about is that in that third fiscal quarter, you would have both a presentation with a first look, likely in either the first or second meeting in March, as well as we would have several finance committee meetings to give you guys take the temperature of where things are as information starts to come in. So you'd have a clearer sense as we move through of what's coming in May. In essence, the goal here would be, while we would have information to you a little later than you're used to in previous years, it would be more accurate. You would not see that big swing from preliminary to final.
I guess, what I like about it is you get closer to the pin on the first shot. And we don't, frankly, do a lot with the preliminary. We, the board, you guys do a lot with the preliminary, but we know that it says that you need more funding than even the index would allow. And you know that we want you to come in under that. And so it's a little bit of shenanigans. However, I think there's really great value in having that mismatched discussion. Like in January, say like our bottoms up based on what we know today would say, we need all this funding. Now we're going to go back, sharpen pencils, make sure that we're spending only on what we need. And we're going to get more accurate information on healthcare and this and that and the other thing. And then we come back and the discussion is almost always on the delta between the two, which is a really clarifying way of talking about the trade-off decisions that have been made. We decided not to hire for these reasons in these departments, and that allowed us to get there. And then we can really talk about the impacts to the kids or the long-term plan. And I worry if we are just looking at like a close to final, do we have as rich dialogue around the trade-off decisions that the administration team is making to get to the end goal? Because of course, if you hit the end goal, that's what we want. We want to be under index, minimal increased impact on the community while still building our tax base and funding all the goals of the school. But there's really material trade-off decisions that are made to get there. And that's why I just don't want to lose that. And I'm worried if we bypass that preliminary dance, we actually cut out some substantive discussion.
That's understood. That is a reason that some people like to go through prelim, to have that initial discussion. We can take a look and back up first look budget. And that's why I'm saying first look. I still believe first look is a budget that gets put together that's not going to mirror the final. I think that, if you do a first look, it's putting all the pieces together on what people are asking for and what the needs are and solidifying that. It's still having that staffing discussion. That's not going to go away. So I think the information that you're looking for is still there. If you want it a little bit earlier, we can most certainly accommodate that. I think one of the things I struggle with because of how early it's been done here is that you get into November and December and you really do not have critical data that you need. It is really, really a guesstimate, and numbers swing so dramatically that is it a real discussion on what you really peel back, because you're putting guesstimates in because you don't know. I would recommend that if we do a first look, it would be, if we had to back it up February-ish, to still have that preliminary discussion. The preliminary process, as far as even information being out there, it's really in order for districts to apply for the exceptions. And if we truly believe we needed the exceptions, I would put us through a preliminary process. I've looked at the history over the last 10 years of tax increases, and we haven't gone above index. We haven't had the need to. We've talked about fund balance at, for my first year here at the end of the budget season. I understand the board's feel on that and Dr. Yannicone's feel on that. as far as use of fund balance and making sure that, you know, we're being diligent about protecting fund balance and making sure that it doesn't dip too much. I'm also aware of not wanting to go above index, to make sure that we come in somewhere where we're building capacity within our millage, but staying under index. That has been something that was made very clear to me when I first got here. So I think this process still allows the conversations that you're looking for. It just won't be such a big swing. There will still be a swing between the first look budget and the discussions that happen in between that to when we get to proposed final. That's just the nature of the budgeting process. So, you know, I'm hoping I'm kind of giving you a sense of safety with that you won't lose that process. It just isn't going to be such a high swing. That's what I'm accustomed to, is having those discussions on what decisions get made on what do you include and what don't you include in a budget, because we're not going to be able to do everything. So things are going to be put in there for the first look that get whittled out because of those decision-making process. And I started out by saying, and I know it's aggressive because of how much we've needed to use fund balance to balance the budget over the last few years, is my ultimate goal is to whittle that down to zero. I want to present a balanced budget ultimately. If that doesn't happen this year, then that'll be my goal over the next few years. And, you know, those discussions need to be had in order to make that happen, especially when you're starting with a $2 million swing of needing fund balance. So, but our recommendation is to go with opt-out, but if the group wants to go with a prelim budget, we can most certainly go through that process. That's not a problem on our end administratively.
I really do like the sound of this approach, this opt-out approach. And I hear what Jeff is saying, and I agree. It's nice to see the big swings sometimes, but, you know, I'm thinking back to I'm newer to this process, but I'm thinking back to how I've always received the preliminary budget, and it's like, that's a huge number. And then when you see how big the change is, it almost seems ridiculous to present such a large and unrealistic initial number. I don't know that we need that much shock to have the benefit of it, because, like, honestly, I think the second time around when I saw it, I was like, oh, that'll never happen. It's, you know, my reaction changed, and I'd like to see some more realistic numbers as part of the preliminary process. But that's just my feeling.
And I would also have to agree. It would be great to see, you know, some real numbers, and that way we can really take a look at it, you know, holistically.
I think I appreciate hearing from all of you. And I think, Jeff, we can satisfy the concern, which is that I think I'm hearing, and please tell me if I'm wrong. You want to know what we're trading off. You want to know where we're debating the need, the relative need, because I think what I've experienced just in the short period of time, you know, even in the years that I was assistant superintendent, is that the board has wanted to make sure that students got what they needed. And you didn't want us to either cut too much and lose something that kids might need. And you also, you know, wanted us to be responsible and absolutely stay under index. So we could, in those months, February, March, April, continue to inform the board both publicly and at finance as to where some of these trade-offs discussions are. To be frank, the discussions we have in the second quarter are not substantive because they can't be. We just don't have the information. So while the administrative team will propose potential staffing additions for the following year, we really don't get into the meat of it until the third quarter because we can't. We just don't know what our numbers are yet. So, you know, Neil, you are correct that the numbers are purposefully high because we're trying to give ourselves room to move as needed. So if we wait until those numbers are actually provided by to Kara, whether it's PSERS numbers or you know, other resources that she's going to have, revenue sources she's going to have, you're actually going to get better information as to where we are parsing out relative need and want. You're going to get better information in the third quarter.
Yeah, I certainly won't stand in the way of this novel approach. Novel for us, Ms. Green, I understand, not for everyone. But I think I would want to make repeat some sort of statement that I just made at the board meeting, because I want to avoid any real or perceived lack of transparency in the process, right? You are a new superintendent, you are a new business administrator. We will have new board members going through a process, right? And so if the problem statement is, how can you assure that there is substantive discussion and understanding by the board of the trade-offs to get to what we all agree is the goal, which is below index, fully fund what we need for our kids, and as minimal usage of the fund balance as possible. Like, we're all like, that's the end goal that we all want. Great. But how do we make sure that we're having any public debate and discussion leading up to that, even that first look, to say, like, here's going to be some of the areas that are going to be tough choices for us. Here's some places where we're seeing need, we're evaluating its impact on budget. If there was some way to build that into these meetings, updates at board meetings, to basically show the work, right? Show the work so that there's clarity.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, makes perfect sense. And, you may remember last spring, we changed the budget numbers in that 30-day period.
Yeah.
In May, because we were still having conversation about use of the fund balance and how much of the fund balance to use. And I know Kara is very optimistic that she can get us to a balanced budget, and that's her intention. But I think that we can make public, and we should make public, those conversations about what does that mean? What is the trade-off to get to a balanced budget? So, we're happy to do that through the entire spring semester so that people feel really good about the number we land on come June.
I mean, at the end of the day with this whole thing, the narrative that we're going to see is, you're going to end up with a lot of community members that are going to view any tax increase as irresponsible on the part of the school district. And whether or not they follow the narrative as we get to there, or take the time to go back and review the meetings, like a lot of, I don't know, it seems like all we have is what they witnessed or what somebody witnesses at the time. And if it's just the tax bill, or if they see one meeting where it says, hey, we're increasing it by X percentage or whatever it is, that's what the takeaway is. So it's hard to, I think, manage the message for people who aren't as engaged. Not that they need to, people have other things going on, and I know that the spending has a huge impact. But we hear all the time, what are you going to do to reduce taxes? And like, that's just never going to happen, because spending, the nature of running the school district, if we were reducing taxes, we would be reducing the quality of education that the students receive, which would be reducing the value of Springfield. And so it's a hard message, and I'm going off on a tangent here.
Let me make sure I understand from the three of you, and I realize the committee may change in January with the election, but currently the direction of the board is that you would like Kara to bring a budget. You'd like us to bring a budget forward in the spring that is below index, if at all, minimally uses the fund balance and meets the educational needs of the students.
I'd love to see that.
Okay.
Yes.
So that will be those are our marching orders. We will do everything we can to make sure that we meet that expectation. And if we're struggling with that because there are trade-offs, we will let you know. We can come back to you and say, listen, I know we said no fund balance. Without the fund balance, here's what we lose, or here's what we wanted to do and can't do. All right. One of the things that Karen and I have talked about quite a bit is we do not want the ARP ESSER dollars, which are certainly a nice cushion, to be used for anything other than what they are supposed to be used for, which is to mitigate the impact of the pandemic, right? So we want to be very careful. For example, some parents in their feedback to us in the surveys have suggested additional staffing for math or reading instruction. We have to be very careful because you become reliant when those additional staff are hired. It's something that people will not want to get rid of later because they will become accustomed to the level of service being provided with additional staff. So we have to be very, very cautious as we add positions, that it is essential for the education of students. As we did last year when we lowered class size at the middle school, that was strategic because we knew that we had class sizes over 30 and that has a detrimental impact on student learning. So now they're at 23, 24, 25. They are much healthier. And students have better support, bottom line. So we're going to make sure that we use the grant funding correctly and in a way that helps students and mitigates the impact, but isn't extending a need that then we have to handle within the budget after 2024. And we'll do everything we can to meet your direction, which is get us in under index and use as little of the fund balance as possible.
And believe me, the communication doesn't go away with this option. It's not you pass the resolution and don't see us again until May. That's not going to happen. There will be lots of communication on the budget process. If anything, we need to make sure this committee is very comfortable with what is being presented to the board and you all understand that. So we will be communicating.
Okay, so it sounds like we have a go-ahead to go with the opt-out resolution with the understanding that we'll continue to provide transparency through the process.
Are you comfortable even making a statement on the goal of, what we just aligned on? Yeah, great.
Yes, absolutely. One of the things that's going to be, I think, interesting this spring is that the index is higher.
Yeah.
They went from 3 to 3.4. And I understand based on, Neil, what you're saying, that is not what the public wants to hear in Springfield, that we can raise taxes even higher. But there's a reason why the index is set based on what, the government thinks is reasonable.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's tricky. I think the narrative is really tricky because on one hand, we'll have community members excited about purchasing land on Hawes Lane, but on, where's the money come from? And then, everybody, I think everybody is proud of our district. It's just, it would be nice to not have to pay for it. I agree, but we've got to pay for it. We have to do it in time so that in the future we don't end up in a situation where we have where we really do need to push that index, because that's just kicking the can down the road, and that's not responsible. I know I'm preaching to the choir.
Yeah, I mean, so in our conversations with each of the departments and the building leaders, we ask for what are the needs? So what are the essential needs to continue to offer programming as it exists today for students? What are your short-term wants, which are, if I could, I would grow the program in this way. For example, we would love an after-school extracurricular program at the elementary level. That requires additional transportation, which is buses and drivers and advisors, et cetera. So that's a want. It's not a need. It's a want. And so we talk about that at our meetings and see what are the relative costs. And then that's the weighing, the relative tax increase. Is this something that we want to try to push for or not? And then we have long-term wishes. We do try to dream through the budget process that if we were in a good position, what's a way in which we would want to really grow, and get the district, because we do want to continue to improve our opportunities in the district. And so we try to have a practical, approach of the needs to continue as we are, which we think is as a great district. And then how can we grow a little and how can we grow a lot? And every year that's the push and pull. How much dreaming do we want to do? How much do we need to stay on, with feet on the ground?
Sounds good.
Okay. And then the last thing that just needs to be brought up is that I believe we're looking at having another finance committee meeting on November 11th, I believe is the date. That will be the audit presentation. So I have the auditor all lined up, ready to present. He said he'd be ready to go to be in front of you to tell us how we ended last year. So that's what's on schedule for that. And if there's any other information that comes up regarding budgetary, anything that would impact budget or anything that we could pass along at that time, we can add it to the agenda.
I do want to share with you all, and Kara, I'm sure you won't mind, Katie has done a phenomenal job in shepherding through audit. That has been a primary responsibility of hers. And I emailed the board this morning, last evening, Katie was approved as the next business administrator for Eastern. So she'll be leaving us at the end of the month, but she has done a phenomenal job for us for years. And we're really, well, we're sorry to see her go. We're very happy for her. This is a great opportunity.
Congratulations.
You're muted, Katie, but I saw you say thank you.
I'm smiling and crying at the same time. So that's what you see here. Yes,
Katie's been fantastic.
She has, most definitely. She was great with my transition coming in. There was a little gap between when I started and when Mr. King left. Katie held the ship, and since I've been here, there's nothing words can say with what she brings to the team and to the district. She's going to be missed. It's our loss and Eastern's gain. She's going to do great. I'm super excited for her and super proud of her that she's going to the next level. And we need more people like Katie in the realm of BA. So.
All right. Thank you both. I appreciate it.
Congratulations.
It's awesome that you're actually still staying in the family too at Eastern. And I know Ken's probably very excited, right? Because he's been in that interim role. So
Yes.
Yeah, he'd like her there tomorrow because he'd like to resume his retirement, but we told him we need a few weeks to wrap things up.
Congrats.
Yes,
It's really exciting.
Thank
We've
you.
already asked for a discount on Eastern students that we're sending, but we got a resounding no for that. So he's been taught very well.
Getting right to work for Eastern.
Yep.
All right, everybody. Well, thanks very much. Have a great day. And Neil, if you have any questions as you're preparing the summary for Tuesday night, please reach out to Kara and we'll make sure you have what you need.
Sounds
All
good.
right.
Thank you.
I'll get notes circulated. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks, everybody. Have a great day.